People like you don't sit here." The sentence didn't land softly. It detonated in the narrow cabin like a crack of lightning against metal. Heads jerked up from glossy magazines and half-finished coffees. Seatbelts tugged as passengers leaned sideways to see. The voice belonged to a flight attendant, her navy uniform pressed sharp, her badge catching the overhead light. But it wasn't professionalism that filled her tone. It was dismissal, final, cold, and her finger was aimed straight at him. A tall black man in a plain t-shirt and jeans, backpack strap cutting across his chest, stood quietly in the aisle. No suit, no watch, no entourage trailing behind. Just a boarding pass in his hand, first class, seat 2 amperes. But none of those details mattered to her. What she saw was enough to draw her verdict. He didn't belong. She pushed again, louder this time, letting the entire row hear it. "Sir, this cabin is for paying clients. Take your things and head to economy." A murmur rippled like static. A woman in 3C gasped. A teenager lifted his phone as if instinct. From row 4, a businessman lowered his newspaper slowly, brow furrowed, whispering, "That can't be right." Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus. Marcus Carter didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply extended his boarding pass. Calm, centered, his voice low but steady. "This is my seat." The attendant didn't even glance at the paper. She folded her arms tighter, lips pressed into something between a smirk and a dare. "Not today. Step back before I call security." Another crew member appeared beside her, younger, wearing the same Navy uniform but carrying the same smirk. He gave Marcus a once-over and chuckled. "Yeah, man, you're lost. Economy's down the aisle." The tension thickened like the recycled air wasn't enough anymore. Passengers exchanged looks, half disbelief, half hesitation. The hum of the engines filled the silence they left behind. Marcus stood still, grounded, as if the floor itself had chosen sides. His stillness wasn't surrender, it was something heavier. Calculation. But to the crew, it looked like weakness. To them, a man dressed without status couldn't possibly carry weight. They had no idea who he was. No idea that the person they were trying to erase from first class wasn't just another passenger with a disputed ticket. They were trying to erase the one man in the cabin who could decide their future. For now, he gave them nothing, no raised voice, no argument. Only silence. A silence that pressed harder than any protest. A silence that made strangers in the cabin shift uncomfortably, as though they could feel what was about to come. Because the real turbulence on this flight hadn't started in the clouds outside. It had started here, in row 2 amperes, with 7 words hurled like a verdict. "People like you don't sit here." And with those words, the trial of the cabin began. Marcus Carter slid the boarding pass back into his palm, but he didn't move. The cabin expected him to retreat. That was the script they thought he would follow. Lower his head, shuffle down the aisle, disappear into economy. But Marcus wasn't reading from their script. He had written his own. What no one in this cabin could see was the truth that traveled with him, heavier than any carry-on. Marcus Carter was no ordinary traveler. He was the founder and CEO of Carter Global, a billion-dollar logistics and aviation conglomerate. He owned distribution hubs across 3 continents, and 25% of Horizon Airlines, the very company that operated this flight, belonged to him. This trip wasn't about convenience. It was a quiet inspection. A personal check on the airline he had helped rescue 2 years ago after a bankruptcy scare. He'd read the complaints, passengers treated like intruders for how they looked, not what they paid. Staff bending rules for preferred faces while dismissing others. Marcus wanted to see it firsthand. So he dressed down. No tailored suit, no engraved cufflinks, just jeans and a black t-shirt. He booked a first-class seat under his real name, no corporate account, no VIP alert. If the system worked, no one should care what he wore. Now the system was revealing itself. The attendant still stood in front of him, blocking the aisle like a human barricade. Her jaw tightened as if the calm in his eyes irritated her more than any protest. Behind her shoulder, the younger crew member shook his head with a laugh. "Man, I don't know how you even got through the gate." A woman 2 rows back muttered under her breath. "Unbelievable." She clutched her handbag tighter, not from fear, but from anger that bled into the silence. Marcus inhaled slowly. He'd seen this before. At 25, freshly graduated, he was rejected from a regional airline job because, as the manager said, "You're not the image we're looking for." At 32, a venture deal nearly collapsed when investors refused to believe a black man in an off-the-rack suit had raised capital on his own. Now, at 45, with billions in assets, the same script was being read again, line for line. He set his backpack down by his foot and looked around the cabin. Every set of eyes became a mirror, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some already rehearsing the lie they'd tell later. Maybe he was in the wrong seat. But Marcus knew better. The silence pressed heavier. The engines hadn't even started, yet turbulence had already arrived. The flight attendant finally leaned closer, lowering her voice but not her hostility. "Sir, let me be clear. You don't belong here. Step out, or I'll make sure you're removed before takeoff." Marcus didn't answer. Not yet. Because for him, every insult was evidence. Every glance of doubt was proof. And every second he remained standing calm in that aisle was part of a test that Horizon Airlines was already failing. The hum of the air vents wasn't enough to mask the tension. First class had turned into a stage, every passenger an unwilling witness. The attendant squared her shoulders and waved for backup. Another crew member appeared from the galley, tall, smug, his tie knotted like armor. "What's the holdup?" he asked. She tilted her head toward Marcus. "Passenger in the wrong cabin. Claims this is his seat." The man chuckled under his breath. "Not dressed like that, it isn't." Passengers stirred. A woman in 4B whispered, "Did he just say that out loud?" Her seatmate frowned, pulling out a phone, screen lighting up. Marcus remained still, fingers resting on the boarding pass, the ink of 2 amperes printed bold. He didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. Every word they threw at him was recording itself in the silence that followed. The attendant leaned toward the intercom at the bulkhead, her voice sharp, carrying through the cabin. "Security to gate B14. Possible fraud in first class." Gasps broke the hush. One passenger muttered, "She called him fraud?" Without even checking. Another, younger, raised his phone higher, red light blinking. Across the aisle, a college student in a hoodie whispered, "Yo, I'm catching this." His camera tilted, lens trained on Marcus, on the crew, on the storm building in real time. Marcus lifted his hand slowly, palm outward, not at the crew but at the cameras. His voice was steady, almost soft. "Don't film this. Let them hear it, not watch it." The words hung in the air. A few phones lowered, reluctantly. Silence thickened again. But the crew mistook that calm for submission. The younger attendant smirked, folding his arms. "He's bluffing. Can't even show ID." Marcus slipped his wallet open, placed his driver's license against the boarding pass, and set both on the armrest of seat 2 amperes. Evidence laid bare. Proof offered without fanfare. The lead attendant didn't touch it. She just glanced and scoffed. "Fake. We've seen this before." Her dismissal cut sharper than any shout. It wasn't about evidence. It was about erasure. From row 5, a middle-aged man shook his head. "That's enough," he muttered. "He showed you everything." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The attendant ignored him, eyes fixed on Marcus. She stepped closer, voice low but venomous. "You've got 30 seconds to move." And that was when a passenger 2 rows back, a woman in business attire, laptop balanced on her knees, finally snapped. "You can't just throw him out. His ticket scanned green. I saw it." Her words cracked the cabin open. Murmurs rose, indignation leaking from seat to seat. Phones reappeared, recording not just Marcus now, but the crew, the bias, the unraveling authority. The attendant's jaw locked, realizing the control she thought she held was slipping. She hissed through clenched teeth, "Stay in your seats. We'll handle this." But the cabin wasn't convinced, and Marcus, still calm, still silent, knew exactly what was happening. The trial of the aisle had begun, and the witnesses were no longer neutral. Marcus lowered himself into seat 2 amperes as if it were always his. No rush, no resistance, just quiet certainty. The attendants hovered, unsettled. They had expected anger, raised voice, argument, a scene. Instead, the man they tried to push out simply sat down, folded his boarding pass neatly, and rested his hands on his lap. The younger attendant scoffed. "See? He's stalling. He knows he doesn't belong." But the words sounded thinner now, brittle against the silence Marcus carried. Passengers leaned forward, straining to read the moment. One whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Another answered softly, "Because he doesn't have to." The lead attendant stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her condescension. "Sir, if you refuse to move, we will remove you." Marcus blinked once. His gaze didn't waver. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply met her eyes with a calm so heavy it forced her to look away. The cabin was holding its breath. The air felt charged, like static before lightning. Marcus inhaled slowly, then exhaled, measured, deliberate. To anyone else, it looked like composure. But for him, it was memory. He remembered Atlanta, years ago, being told a first-class upgrade was reserved for real customers. He remembered Chicago, when a clerk claimed his black card was too new to be valid. He remembered every time silence had been mistaken for weakness, every time dignity had been treated like fraud. Now, silence was his weapon. The younger attendant shifted uneasily, tapping a pen against the manifest in his hand. "Security's on the way," he muttered, loud enough for passengers to hear. "This won't end well for him." A woman in 3C bristled. "For him or for you?" Her voice cracked through the tension, earning glances of agreement from nearby rows. Marcus didn't move. He didn't even glance at her in gratitude. He kept still, as if rooted to the leather seat. His calm was not for comfort, it was a mirror. Every second he refused to erupt was another second their prejudice reflected back at them. The lead attendant tried again, this time softer, almost pleading. "Sir, just cooperate. It'll be easier." Marcus tilted his head slightly, a gesture so small it might have been a nod or a warning. His voice, when it finally came, was low, steady, precise. "Easier for who?" The question sliced through the cabin. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Passengers straightened in their seats, eyes flicking between crew and traveler. The power balance had shifted, if only by an inch. Silence returned, thicker now, almost unbearable. Even the engines outside seemed to quiet. Marcus leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the storm come to him. The quiet was broken not by Marcus, but by the scrape of a phone sliding free from its case. Row 4. Aisle seat. A young man in a hoodie raised his camera high, red light glowing like a signal flare. "Nah, people need to see this," he muttered. The lead attendant snapped her head toward him. "Sir, put that away. Filming crew is against policy." But the camera didn't lower. In fact, 2 more phones appeared, screens lighting up in the dim cabin. A quiet rebellion had started, pixel by pixel. From across the aisle, a woman in business attire shifted forward. She had been silent until now, her laptop still glowing on the tray table. Her voice carried, firm but calm. His ticket scanned green. "I was right behind him at the gate. Don't lie to everyone here." Passengers stirred. Murmurs spread like wildfire. She saw it. "Yeah, they scanned it. So why are they acting like this?" The younger attendant rolled his eyes, trying to laugh it off. "Ma'am, you must have been mistaken." But the woman's voice sharpened. "Don't patronize me. I watched it light up green. I know what I saw." The tension cracked wider. A man in 5D, salt and pepper hair, leaned into the aisle. "She's right. This isn't about a ticket. This is about him." His finger pointed not at Marcus, but at the uniformed barrier standing in front of him. The lead attendant's jaw tightened. "Stay out of this." But the passengers weren't staying out anymore. The courtroom had its jurors, and they were no longer silent. Marcus sat steady, eyes closed as if listening to a verdict only he could hear. His calm was contagious now, pulling voices out of throats that had started the flight sealed in silence. The student with the hoodie spoke again, louder. "Why you so afraid to check the system? Run his name. That's all you gotta do." Phones angled higher. The glow of recording screens turned the aisle into a corridor of evidence. The lead attendant reached for the intercom again. "Security, urgent. Escalation in first class." Her voice wavered slightly now, not with authority, but with desperation. Passengers exchanged looks. They weren't fooled. One woman shook her head, whispering, "Escalation? He hasn't moved." The man in 5D raised his voice so the whole cabin heard. "The only escalation here is your prejudice." A gasp rippled. The word was out in the open now, prejudice. It hung heavy, undeniable, impossible to snatch back. Marcus opened his eyes, finally. His gaze swept the aisle, steady, deliberate, meeting the stares of strangers who had chosen to speak. He didn't thank them, didn't nod. He let their words hang where they belonged, in the cabin's collective memory. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, alive with resistance. And for the first time, the crew felt the weight shift. They weren't just facing one man in seat 2 amperes anymore. They were facing the witnesses. The aisle stiffened as a shadow fell across it. From the cockpit door, the captain emerged, broad-shouldered, crisp uniform, jaw set like stone. His presence carried authority, but his eyes carried judgment before a word left his mouth. "What's happening here?" His voice cut through the murmurs. The lead attendant stepped forward quickly, seizing the moment. "Captain, we have a fraud attempting to occupy seat 2 amperes. He's refusing to comply." Fraud. The word cracked like a gavel. Passengers gasped. Some shook their heads. The young man in the hoodie whispered to his phone. They really said fraud. His live stream viewers would eat it alive. Marcus didn't move. He let the label hang, let it burn itself into the silence. The captain's gaze swept Marcus up and down, lingering on the plain shirt, the worn backpack at his feet. His frown deepened. "Sir, I'm going to need you to vacate this seat immediately. You'll be reassigned to economy, or security will remove you." Economy. As if dignity could be reassigned like a seat number. From row 3, the businesswoman snapped shut her laptop and stood halfway. "Captain," his ticket scanned green. "I was there. This isn't a mistake. This is profiling." The captain's voice turned sharp. "Ma'am, sit down. You're interfering with protocol." But she didn't. Protocol? Number. This is bias dressed up as procedure. The words buzzed across the cabin. Phones caught every syllable. A murmur swelled. "She's right. This is wrong. Why are they targeting him?" The younger attendant smirked, muttering loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Scammers always pull this stunt. Dress down, act calm, play victim." A man in 5D slammed his palm against his armrest. "That's enough. You don't even know him." The captain turned sharply. "Sir, sit down or you'll be escorted off as well." The threat lingered, but the power in it faltered. Too many witnesses, too many recordings. Marcus finally opened his eyes, fully, steady, and unshaken. He looked at the captain, not defiant, not submissive, simply present. His voice was calm, surgical. "You've made 4 accusations and 0 verifications. Is that your standard procedure?" The captain's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. The cabin leaned in, waiting. The silence weighed more than turbulence ever could. Then, from row 6, a quiet voice broke the pause. A teenager, no older than 16, spoke to his mother, but loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Why are they treating him like a criminal? He hasn't done anything." The mother squeezed his hand, her own eyes locked on Marcus. "Because sometimes the uniform thinks it decides who belongs." The cabin wasn't quiet anymore. It was restless, shifting, charged. And Marcus? He sat in 2 amperes, still and immovable, as if the seat had never belonged to anyone else. His calm wasn't silence anymore. It was defiance wrapped in dignity. The crew had wanted submission. What they got instead was resistance without a word. And the more they pressed, the clearer it became. They weren't just fighting a man. They were fighting the truth every passenger now carried with them. The tension snapped like a cable under strain. The lead attendant reached forward, snatched the boarding pass from the armrest, and tore it clean down the middle. The rip echoed sharper than the engines outside. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A woman in 3C clutched her pearls. The teenager in row 6 muttered, "She really did that." Phones shot higher into the air, capturing every second. The attendant held the torn ticket aloft like a trophy. There, fraud exposed, seat reassigned. Her voice cracked with triumph, but the echo that followed wasn't applause, it was outrage. "You can't just destroy his ticket," the businesswoman shouted, stepping into the aisle. "That's vandalism, not protocol." The captain barked, "Sit down." But even his voice wavered now, struggling against the tide of disbelief. The younger attendant stepped in, sweeping Marcus's backpack off the adjacent seat with a shove. It hit the floor with a dull thud, contents rattling. "You're done here," he sneered. Phone zoomed in. Every insult was evidence, every gesture a verdict. Marcus looked at the backpack, then back at the crew. Calm, unmoved, his stillness cut deeper than rage could. The woman in 5D's aisle seat half rose, trembling. "He hasn't raised his voice once. And you call him fraud? You call security for this?" The lead attendant snapped back. "Ma'am, he doesn't belong here. You don't decide. We do." The cabin bristled. Passengers murmured openly now. Unbelievable. Check the manifest, it's right there. They don't even want to look. From the back, a man in a gray suit muttered, "This is discrimination. Plain and simple." His words carried down the aisle like contraband truth. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his first movement in minutes. His voice was low, measured, deliberate. "You tore my ticket, you touched my property, and you called me fraud, all without a single check." The lead attendant snapped. "Because it's obvious." Marcus tilted his head. "Obvious to who?" The question stung sharper than accusation. Passengers shifted, waiting for an answer that never came. The captain finally moved, gesturing toward the intercom. "Security will handle this. Remove him before this gets worse." But the crowd was already against him. The woman in business attire raised her voice. "It's worse because of you. He belongs here, and you know it." The young man in the hoodie turned his phone around to face himself. "Y'all see this? First-class meltdown. They tore his ticket, called him fraud, threw his stuff on the floor, and he's still calm." The feed was live now, hearts and comments flooding his screen. Marcus leaned back into seat 2 amperes, unflinching. His silence was louder than their shouting, heavier than their authority. He wasn't just enduring humiliation. He was documenting it without a camera, without a lens. Every insult carved itself into the memory of the witnesses around him, and the more they tried to erase him, the clearer he became. The torn ticket fluttered to the floor, halves lifeless against the carpet. Marcus didn't reach for them. He reached for his phone. Slow, calm, surgical. He pressed one button, lifted it to his ear, and spoke with the clarity of someone who had rehearsed this moment in silence. "Rachel, log this. Escalate Protocol 1. Gasps flickered across the cabin. The name, the authority, the certainty. Passengers leaned closer, phones craning higher to catch every syllable. On the other end, a voice answered instantly, crisp and controlled. "Understood, Mr. Carter. Time-stamped. Protocol 1 is active. The board has been alerted." The captain froze mid-step. The attendants glanced at each other, unease cracking their armor. The word board didn't sound like a bluff. It sounded like a verdict in motion. Marcus lowered the phone slightly, not to hide, but to let them hear. His tone never rose. Every word, every action, every insult documented. This cabin is already a file, and that file is in the hands of people who sign your checks. Ugh! A murmur erupted, heavy as thunder. The board. Did he just say Carter? Wait, Marcus Carter? Recognition sparked in scattered corners. Passengers whispered his name like it was a secret finally remembered. The lead attendant forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "You expect us to believe a scammer calls a boardroom? Nice try." But her voice shook. The businesswoman stood again, stronger now. "I believe him. You should too. Because if you're wrong, this isn't just misconduct, it's career suicide." The younger attendant scoffed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. He muttered, "He's bluffing," though less certain now. Marcus stayed seated, phone still in hand, his gaze steady. "You wanted escalation. Here at Island. Not a scene, not a recording, a record." Rachel's voice returned, amplified by the hush. "Mr. Carter, live compliance review initiated. Incidents logged. Verbal bias, property interference, fraudulent accusation, ticket destruction. Do you want me to patch audio directly to the chairman?" The cabin held its breath. Even the hum of the engines felt muted. Marcus nodded once. "Yes." The lead attendant's face paled. Her eyes darted to the captain, but he said nothing, jaw clenched tight. From the back, a passenger whispered what half the cabin was already thinking. "They picked the wrong man." The teenager in row 6 grinned at his phone. "This is wild. They don't even know who he Island." Marcus finally set the phone down on his knee, speaker on, voice steady. "You accused the wrong person today, and every second you keep pushing, you write your own resignation letter." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, like a chamber cocked and ready. And for the first time, the crew realized they weren't in control of this flight anymore. The cabin felt suspended, a courtroom waiting for the final witness. Marcus sat steady in seat 2 amperes, phone balanced on his knee, the quiet hum of Rachel's voice still audible on speaker. "Board review is live. All data captured." The lead attendant swallowed hard, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She glanced at the captain. He avoided her eyes. Passengers leaned forward. The question was heavy in the air. Who is this man? Marcus exhaled slowly, then lifted his gaze across the aisle. His voice didn't rise, but every syllable carried. You called me a fraud. You tore my ticket. You tried to erase me from a seat I paid for. And you did it with confidence because you thought I had no power here. He paused, letting the silence swell. Then he stood, smooth and unhurried, the aisle lights catching the calm steel in his expression. My name, he said deliberate, is Marcus Carter, founder of Carter Global, 25% owner of Horizon Airlines, the very company that operates this flight. The words landed like a gavel. The cabin erupted. Gasps, murmurs. A few passengers clapped before stopping, stunned by their own hands. The businesswoman's mouth curved into a tight smile. I knew it, she whispered, half to herself, half to the cameras already streaming. The teenager in row 6 shouted, Yo, this is crazy. He owns the airline. His feed exploded with comments racing across the screen. The lead attendant staggered back a step, her grip tightening on the torn halves of the boarding pass still clutched in her hand. Her confidence drained like water from a cracked glass. The younger attendant muttered, No, that can't be true. But his voice shook, and he refused to meet Marcus's eyes. The captain cleared his throat, but his authority had withered. Mr. Carter, if this is a misunderstanding, Marcus cut him off, not loud, but absolute. It's not a misunderstanding, it's a pattern. And today, you performed it for an audience. Phones captured every syllable. Screens glowed like courtroom stenographers, evidence archived in real time. The businesswoman rose fully now, no hesitation. You see? He was calm the entire time. You all accused him because of how he looked, not because of what he carried, not because of his ticket, because of your bias. Murmurs swelled, agreement spilling row by row. One man clapped again, this time without stopping. Soon others joined, until the cabin vibrated with applause. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't bask. He simply raised a hand, quieting the noise. The problem isn't that you didn't know my name, he said. The problem is how you treated someone you thought didn't matter. The words hit harder than the reveal itself. Passengers nodded, some with tears glinting at the corners of their eyes. The lead attendant dropped the shredded ticket onto the floor. Her face was pale now, her smirk gone, replaced by the unmistakable weight of fear. The silence returned, but it was no longer theirs. It belonged to Marcus. And in that silence, everyone in the cabin understood. The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered. For a moment, the cabin was still. Not the calm of order, but the silence of a verdict settling in. The crew shifted uneasily, their polished uniforms suddenly looking like costumes in a play that had lost its script. Then the passengers moved. The businesswoman in row 3 stepped fully into the aisle, standing squarely between Marcus and the attendants. He's not leaving this seat, she declared, her voice firm as stone. The teenager raised his phone high. Everybody's watching, he shouted, his live stream already flooded with comments. Protect him. This is history. Don't back down. In row 5, the salt and pepper man unbuckled his belt and stood, crossing his arms. I've flown Horizon for 20 years. Never again if this is how you treat your own owner. The words cracked the air. Passengers murmured in agreement. One woman whispered, He saved this airline, and this is the thanks he gets? The lead attendant stumbled back, eyes darting to the captain for rescue. But the captain's jaw was tight, his authority leaking like air from a punctured tire. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice forced. Please remain seated. This is an airline matter, not your concern. The cabin erupted. A chorus of voices shouted back. It is our concern. You humiliated him in front of us? You don't get to silence this. Phones tilted, cameras flashing red lights across the aisle like warning beacons. The courtroom was no longer metaphor, it was real, and the jury had turned against the crew. The younger attendant raised his hands, trying to command calm. Everyone sit down. This is a violation of FAA guidelines. But his words were drowned by a woman's sharp retort from row 6. FAA doesn't give you permission to discriminate. Applause thundered, scattered but fierce. Marcus remained seated, the eye of the storm. He hadn't moved from 2 amperes, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't once lost control. But the cabin around him had shifted sides. The verdict wasn't his to argue for anymore, it was theirs to deliver. The businesswoman looked down at him briefly, her voice softer but resolute. "You don't stand alone." He nodded once, not in gratitude but in recognition. The silence he had carried was no longer his burden alone. It had multiplied, spreading row by row until it became collective resistance. The lead attendant tried one last tactic, her voice brittle. "Security will drag him off this plane." No, they won't," the salt and pepper man shot back. "Not with all of us watching." And the phones lifted higher, lenses trained on her like 100 unblinking eyes. The balance had tipped completely. The crew stood isolated, their authority hollow. The passengers, strangers minutes ago, had become a united front. And in the center, Marcus Carter remained calm, composed, immovable. The trial of first class wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told, "You don't belong here." The silence broke with the sharp click of Marcus's phone speaker. Rachel's voice filled the cabin, steady, precise. "Mr. Carter, the board is on standby. Compliance review complete. Do you authorize immediate action?" Every passenger froze. The attendant stiffened. The captain's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Marcus rose from seat 2 amperes, not in anger, not in triumph, but in absolute control. He looked at each uniformed face in turn. "You tore my ticket. You threw my belongings. You called me a fraud in front of paying witnesses, and you did it under Horizon's name." The lead attendant's lips trembled. I can explain." Marcus cut her off, his tone level but final. "You've already explained. Every insult was your explanation." He turned slightly toward his phone. "Rachel, effective immediately. Suspend the captain and crew involved in this incident. Lock their credentials. Initiate security audit." A collective gasp spread like fire through the cabin. The lead attendant's badge buzzed faintly, its screen flashing red. The younger attendant grabbed his lanyard. It had gone dark. Even the captain's tablet blinked. Access revoked. Gasps turned to whispers. "He just fired them." "Right here? On the plane?" "This is unreal." The salt and pepper man folded his arms, satisfaction heavy in his voice. "Justice. About time." The lead attendant stumbled back, pale. You can't do this." Marcus's reply was calm, surgical. "I don't need to shout. I don't need to threaten. This airline is mine to protect, and that means protecting passengers from you." The words cut sharper than any raised voice. The crew stood hollow, badges dead, authority stripped in full view of the people they had tried to deceive. The passengers erupted into applause, not wild but resolute, like a verdict delivered by jury and judge alike. Marcus didn't smile. He simply sat back down in 2 amperes, his phone resting on the armrest, his presence heavier than turbulence. The punishment was delivered, the power reclaimed. And the cabin knew. The storm had ended, not with noise, but with truth. The applause didn't fade quickly. It rolled through the cabin in waves, clapping palms and murmured affirmations, blending with the low hum of the engines. For once, the noise wasn't against Marcus, it was for him. He didn't stand to bask in it. He remained seated in 2 amperes, shoulders square, gaze fixed forward. When the sound dimmed, his voice rose not loud, but cutting, every syllable crisp enough to etch itself into memory. "You thought you could erase me with a torn ticket. You thought silence meant weakness, but silence can be stronger than shouting. Silence holds the truth until the truth speaks for itself." The cabin hushed, phones hovered, recording every word. Marcus turned his eyes to the stunned crew, their badges still dead, authority stripped. "Understand this. I'm not the only one you've done this to. I just happen to be the one who owns the company you work for. The next person won't carry that shield, and that's why you're finished here." He let the weight of that sink in. Passengers nodded, some whispering amen, others shaking their heads in disbelief that they had witnessed it firsthand. Then Marcus looked around the cabin, not at the crew anymore, but at the strangers who had chosen to stand. His voice softened, carrying not command, but conviction. Dignity isn't granted by uniforms or tickets or titles. It's human, and the moment you treat it like a privilege to hand out, you've already lost. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was reverent. The teenager lowered his phone, whispering, "That's going viral." The salt and pepper man muttered, "That's going to history." Marcus leaned back into his seat, closing his eyes briefly. He didn't need the cameras. He didn't need the applause. He had said what mattered. And as the crew stood hollow, passengers united, and the cabin settled into a charged stillness, The truth was undeniable. He hadn't needed to prove himself with shouting, threats, or spectacle. He had proved himself by simply being calm, unshaken, undeniable. His final words carried through the hush, a verdict carved into the air itself. I don't need to record justice. I am its result. The cabin erupted one last time, not in chaos, but in recognition. A trial was over. A lesson was written. And Marcus Carter, silent and steadfast, had turned humiliation into history.